preachers, they preach on what they know, what they've experienced. Brother Frank used to preach all the time about going through the storm, and he could really preach a good message on being delivered from the storm. He was a merchant seaman, and he had a lot of time out on the ship, out in the middle of the ocean, and saw a lot of storms, and knew what it meant to be helpless and out in the storm, and he could really preach a good message on going through the storms, and so that was what he preached a lot of. One thing that I know something about is having a lot of kids, and I can't say that I know that much about how to raise them and the best way to raise them, but I can say that I know how to love them, and that's one thing that I do know. And so I want to look at a story that we all are familiar with about the prodigal son, and maybe see something different than we've seen before about it. Does anybody know what the word prodigal means? Can anybody give me a definition of it? Probably not, because even though I've heard the story all my life, I never, you don't think about it, and you think, well, it must mean like, somebody who's was gone and came back, or somebody who was messed up, but then got back on the right track and got forgiven. But that's not what it means at all. What it means is, prodigal means recklessly wasteful. That means somebody that has something precious and doesn't care anything about it and wastes it all and loses it all because they don't see what they have. So it means that you have something good, but you just don't, you forget about that. You got in your mind that you want to do something else, and you leave what was good, you leave what was precious, and you waste it, and then you realize you don't have it, it's gone, you wasted it. And so I want to look at this story about the prodigal son in a way that maybe we've not looked at before, and maybe we can all see something in it that applies to us. This story has been preached a lot of times by other missionaries, and we've heard, I think Brother Zach preached it not too long ago. And a lot of times we have in our mind this son, the prodigal son, was kind of a happy-go-lucky kind of guy that just wanted to do what he wanted to do. Kind of like Grayson, who wants to go off to Bucharest and make his fortune, or just go have a good time. And so he tells the dad, "Oh, Dad, cut me a check for my part of the inheritance, and I want to go." And the father maybe doesn't agree with it, but he indulges his son and lets him go. But I don't think that that's exactly the way it probably happened. So as we look at this story, I want to look, like I said, point out some things maybe that are different. But in this story, there's I think maybe something for everybody, and I'd like to try to figure out maybe where you are in this story, because in this story we have a teenager, or I say a son. It doesn't say how old he is. Back in those days, you were a man when you were probably 15 years old. You were already working, and so he could have been 15, 16 years old. It doesn't say. But you got a young man, a young person who maybe has a relationship with his family that he's not happy with, and he's decided he wants something different. Or you might be a parent who has a child who you can't get the relationship where you want it to be with your child. But from a spiritual sense also, you might be away from where God wants you to be. You might be in a place where God's over there, and I ought to be over there, but I'm not. And so as we try to look at this, let's try to think about where we might be in this story. Because in this story there's a father who loves you and wants to forgive you, and that's the big thing I want to take a look at. In the story, the story is told by Jesus. He's talking, and he has a crowd of people gathered together. And like I said, I think there's something for everybody, because in the story, in this account of the story in Luke chapter 15, where we'll turn to. Go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 15 if you would. We'll look at that. And in this story, I think Jesus intended, or he had something for everybody, because everybody, all different kind of people were there. And he even mentions them. He says in verse 1, chapter 15, verse 1 of Luke, he says, "Then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him." And in verse 2 he says, "And the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners, and eateth with them." So he says right there that he's got sinners and publicans, and he's got the scribes and Pharisees, and he also, in a little bit later on, he mentions that his disciples are there also. And so he's got all different kind of people there listening to his story as he gets ready to tell the story. He's got the sinners and publicans, which are like unbelievers, people who don't know God, who don't know about Jesus. He's got the religious crowd, which is the Pharisees and the scribes. And these are people that maybe know all about the Bible, know all about God, have a religion, but maybe don't really know Jesus at all, and don't know who he is and how he is. And then you've got his disciples, who are the ones who are trying to follow Jesus. They're with him, they love him, they want to be with him. And so you have all different kinds of people here that are gathered around as he begins this story. But before he tells the story of the prodigal son, in chapter 15, he tells two other parables. The first parable he tells is about the shepherd who has the 100 sheep. One of the sheep becomes lost. He goes off to find that lost sheep. So the shepherd leaves the 99 sheep, goes and finds his lost sheep, and brings it back. It says in the story that there's rejoicing in heaven. Well, there'll be rejoicing in heaven when a sinner comes back to God, the same way the shepherd rejoiced about finding his lost sheep. The next story that he tells, the next parable he tells, is about a woman who had 10 pieces of silver, and she loses one piece of silver, and she goes through the whole house, cleans the whole house to try to find, and eventually finds this one piece of silver. She's happy that she found the silver, calls her neighbors over and says, "Look, I found my silver that I lost." And it says also there'll be joy in the presence of the angels over a lost sinner that comes to the Lord. So you have these two different stories he tells before talking about the prodigal son. And I think there's a reason he has mentioned these. In both the first two cases, the owner lost something that was valuable. Okay, the shepherd lost a sheep, which is his livelihood. He's raising these sheep to have, so it's something that's worth something to him. And the woman, I was reading different places and different articles, and it said, because it says she lost one of her pieces, 10 pieces of silver, which it doesn't say that's all the money she had. She lost 1/10 of these 10 pieces of silver. Somebody said that back in those days they didn't give like an engagement ring. When you got married, you gave a gift to the bride, and sometimes it was like a matched set of coins. So she could have lost one of these coins, which maybe was not maybe her money that she lost, but maybe it was something that was precious to her anyway. It was something that meant something to her. But the difference in the third story about the prodigal son was that it was a child. And there's a big difference. I think God was trying to point out the difference here. There's one thing to lose something that is just valuable to you, and there's a big difference in losing a child. Whether it be, we lost Noah Cross, and we know what it meant to go through that, so we know firsthand about that. But also in this sense, the story is the father loses the child who decides to just run off and abandon him and his family. And so I think Jesus was trying to show the crowd there, that there's a difference between just these things that we hold precious that are maybe have sentimental value or maybe monetary value, and there's a big difference between that and a child. And I think to God, there's a big difference between everything else in this world and us. I think we're precious to Him in a way that everything else, I think He made the world for us to enjoy. He made the world for us to live in. I think He doesn't care much about those things. They're going to burn up in the end anyway. He cares about us. And so I think that's maybe the reason He told this story in the way that He did. Another thing that was different about the stories is that the sheep that got lost and the coin, although the owner, it was valuable to the owner, how to say this exactly how I want to say it, they didn't care, the owner didn't really care about the coin itself, didn't love the coin. You know, it was something that was important, that had a value to the thing, to the owner. But if for example, the shepherd in a year's time, he would have had a new batch of lambs born, and he would have forgotten about this one sheep that he lost. The same with the woman. Whatever the reason was, it was just a thing. She would have gone on, forgotten about it, and that would have been that. But the child is something that 50 years later, the father would still feel the loss of this child that had gone. And also the child chose to leave. It wasn't, the coin didn't choose to leave. The coin just got lost, and it didn't matter to the coin. And the same way with the sheep. The sheep will just wander off, not paying attention. The sheep didn't do anything intentionally to the shepherd, just wandered off. But this son chose to leave the father, and I think that hurt the father in a way that these other things would not hurt. So let's take a look at the beginning of our story, which starts in verse number 11. So look at verse number 11. And it says here, this is talking about Jesus speaking. He says, "And he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living." Like I said, I think that we have the idea that the son just said, "Hey, Dad, write me a check. I want to go to Bucharest and work. Just write me a check for my share of the inheritance, and I want to go." But I was looking in what it meant to get this inheritance that this boy was asking for. And according to in Deuteronomy somewhere, it talks about the inheritance of the son. And according to Jewish law, the firstborn son was to receive a double portion of the inheritance of what the father leaves. So, for example, if a man had 4 sons, when he died, they divided everything up into 5 portions, and the oldest son got a double portion, and the younger sons all got a single portion. Well, in our story, there's only 2 sons, so the older son was going to get 2/3 of everything, and the younger son would get 1/3 of everything. But for the son to say to the father, "I want my inheritance now. I'm going to leave all my inheritance now." It's maybe not what you think it might be. Number one, it's a huge insult to the father. Basically, he's saying to the father, "I know you're not dead, but you're dead to me. I don't care anything about you. I want what I think's mine." It's really not his until the father's dead. Okay, so for him to say, "I don't care if you're still alive. I want my share of your inheritance," shows that there's a huge problem between the son and the father. It's not just the kid that wants to go off and have a good time. There is a huge problem in this family. For the son to say, "I don't care if you're dead. I want my inheritance," shows that he really has a big problem with the father. There's some huge thing there. And it's not, like I said, he couldn't just say to the father, "Hey, write me a check, I want to leave." they didn't have banks back then. The father's, his inheritance was a third of everything the father owned, which means back then their wealth was their house, their land, their horses, their sheep, their cows, any animals they had, maybe slaves or whatever they had. But everything the father had, for the son to get his third of it, meant that the father had to sell, a third of everything he had, just so that the son could have what he wanted to leave with. And to the son, it didn't matter if the father was still alive and still maybe needed this. You don't know the father. I couldn't just go to my dad and say, I want your car, I want your this, whatever. He still needs them, And so for the son to go to the father and say, I want my stuff, I don't care. I don't care if you still need it. I don't care if I'm not, it's not mine yet, really. I want it now, and I'm going to go. I'm going to take my stuff and go. So I think that maybe we have the idea that it was just a kind of a, okay, son, well, I don't think you should go, but here's your money, go. It was a huge, huge thing in this family that the son would do this to the father. He hurt the father, I'm sure, deeply by saying, I want my inheritance, I'm going to go. So that's the big difference in maybe the way we have always thought about this story going and what it probably really was. Because this was a tremendous thing and a tremendous, I don't know if I'll say scandal or whatever, but you know what I mean? It just tore this family apart. And it was a horrible situation that they were in. And, the thing about it is that we can get in the same place with God sometimes, where we decide that we want what we want, and we're not looking at what kind of damage we're doing to our lives and to maybe others around us. We're just saying, God, this is what I want to do. Or we're not even saying to God, we just go do it. We just turn our backs and go do it. Like I said, we've had a lot of kids and teenagers, and when teenagers get to a certain age, invariably, almost all of them, at some point say, I know what I want better than you know what I want. Or I want to do what I want to do, doesn't matter what you think I should do. And teenagers think, well, their parents don't understand what they're thinking. Their parents don't care about what they're thinking. And so the teenagers just, think, I just got to get away from here because my parents just don't get me, or, they don't care, they don't love me. I just got to, I want to do what I want to do, regardless. And I don't think teenagers even think regardless of this. I think they don't think of maybe the consequences of that. But that's the same thing that we can do with God in our own lives. We can say, this is what I want to do, and there was a time in my life when I was saved, but when I got to be in my 20s maybe, where I had some friends I was hanging out with, and all we cared about was going out and shooting pool, and there's nothing wrong with that, but God was not in my life at all, as far as, he was there obviously, but I didn't acknowledge him. I just did what I wanted to do. And I went for a long time like that, and I knew in the back of my mind, because from the time I grew up, usually every night when I lay down in bed, I'd pray. I'd close my eyes and I'd pray. But then at this point, I'd get in bed, and almost every night I'd be like, I'd turn over this way and turn over this way, because I didn't want to pray, because then it means I have to be looking to God, and I'm embarrassed and ashamed, because I knew I was not in the place that God wanted me to be. So I just tried to ignore God and tried to just do what I wanted to do, and that's the place that we can get in our own Christian lives as well. We can just draw back from God because we know what we want to do is not what He wants us to do, and so we get to this place where we'll, like, if I don't look at Him, then I don't really feel Him looking at me, and I can do what I want to do and try to ignore it. Well, that's the place that we can get with God. Let's look at verse 13 and see what happens when the son decides to do this. It says, And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. So the son gets all his stuff. Whether I don't think he. Of course, he couldn't take the land. He couldn't take the house. He couldn't take a lot of the stuff. I doubt he took off with all the bunch of animals. I imagine they had to sell them, and for him to get some money, the gold to take with him on his trip. So I doubt he let off a whole flock of sheep and horses and goats. I think he just left with the money that he had forced the father to give him. So he takes off, goes, and he does what he wants to do. He does this, and he ends up wasting it all. Like I said, that's what the prodigal son means, is that he is recklessly wasteful. He doesn't care about the fact that I'm just going through this money and I've taken this money from my dad. This is my inheritance. This is my dad's livelihood. I don't care. I'm just going to go have a good time and do what I want to do, which for him at the time was more important than anything else. Just, I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't care about what my father wants. And like I said, with us, oftentimes it's, I don't care what God wants. I just want to do what I want to do. And so, but it seems, like we wouldn't do that, because as Christians, we think of, we grow up thinking that sin equals bad. And it's especially easy to think that when you're looking at somebody else and they're sinning, and you say, oh, well, that's bad, and I see other things people are doing. But in fact, this world does have an attraction to us, and we do, as long as we're in these sinful bodies that we're in, we're attracted to it. So it does, we think, oh, it doesn't make sense that the son would do this, but it does, because every one of us is attracted to things that we shouldn't do as well. We have the desire to go do things that are the things that we want. And it says that in the Bible it mentions the pleasure of sin, for a season. Well, there's a pleasure in sin that all of us are attracted to. And so we get in the same place that this boy was in, because we are going after what we really want. And I'm not talking about, when I say the pleasure of sin, that doesn't mean necessarily that, we all want to go and murder and steal and lie and things like this. But when we take pleasure in things that take us away from where God wants us to be, then those are the sins that are pleasurable to us. There's all kind of things that it might not seem to you like a bad thing, but if it's taking you away from God, then it's a sin. So that pleasure that you have, you're getting pleasure from something that makes it a sin. And we often, like I said, we often enjoy these things, and we often find ourselves in the same place spiritually as this boy was for real. Let's read 14, verse 14, and it says, and when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. So our son, he went off and did what he wanted to do, but then he finds himself in a really bad situation. He finds himself that then he's like, he's gone off, had a good time and everything, but now that's all gone. And that's, like I said, when the Bible talks about the pleasure of sin for a season, that pleasure that you get from these things comes to an end. It's always, there's that joy that you might have from doing the thing that you thought that you wanted to do is only going to be temporary. Eventually you're going to come to the place where you're like, oh man, I wish I hadn't done that. And that's usually the case with us. A lot of teenagers eventually come around and say, oh yeah, Mom, I see now what you're talking about, because that might have been a mistake if I'd have done that. Or maybe they went through a mistake and they say, well, you were right, I probably should have done that. And, you know, hopefully we'll all come around to that point before we hit rock bottom. This boy hit rock bottom. He went so far away, spent everything that his father had given him, and so he had gone to that point. Hopefully we don't have to get there, but he did what he wanted to do, and he got to the place where he busted. He didn't have anything else. One thing I was thinking about, this attraction to something that we think is going to be good. Back in the 1800s in the United States, most everybody lived on the East Coast. At this point, everybody lived, you know, New York and the Carolinas and all this. Everybody had settled on the East Coast of the United States. And most of the rest of the country had not been explored. But somebody made their way across the country and got to California and found gold. And so they get to California and find gold. Word gets back that there's gold in California, and you can just find it, you know. So there was a thing called the California Gold Rush, which was in the middle of like 1850 or something like that. So thousands and thousands of people packed up their families, you know, got rid of everything, put it in a wagon, and headed off across the United States to get to California to try to find this gold. It was because there was an attraction. They thought, oh, if we just get there, we're going to be rich, and this is going to be great, you know. And so thousands of families took off across the United States. Terribly long. I mean, you know, in a car it's bad enough. In an airplane it's bad enough. In a wagon, we're talking 6-8 months a year just to get across the country. It's a long way. So they get across there, and so they spread out and they try to find this gold. It's supposed to be, you can find it anywhere. And so they start their own little mine. They start digging in a cave or whatever they do, or painting in a stream or whatever, however they're going to try to find gold and get rich. Well, some of these people, they're out there one day, they find, hey, there's gold. And they find some gold, and they start mining it or panning it or whatever they're doing. And they start, and so they end up, because you can't just like every day go to the exchange place and cash in your gold for money. So, you know, they might have worked for 6 months or a year after they got there. They've endured this long journey across the country, finally got there. Their family had to build a house and, you know, make a place for their family to live. And they work night and day digging, and finally they got some gold. Well, unfortunately, there's a thing called fool's gold, which is a stone that looks just like gold. You can't tell a difference unless you test it. And some of these people, after they had gone all this way, I mean, like I said, traveled a year, done this, set up a home, worked for another year, trying to amass what they thought was going to be their dream of, I'm going to be rich. They finally make their way back to one of the big cities where there's somebody who can test this gold. And the guy says, I'm sorry, it's just rocks. It's not worth anything. It's not, you know. Can you imagine how devastated these people were that had spent their whole, had uprooted their whole life and turned their whole life over to get there and finally find out it's not what I thought it was going to be. And that's the thing that this boy did. This is where he was. Like I said, hopefully that we'll see before we get to that place that maybe we made a mistake, and maybe we should have listened to God sooner than later. I want to read something right now out of Romans in chapter 6. And it talks about, chapter 6, verse 16. I'll read it. If you don't get there, it's okay. It says, know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. So we actually choose who we're going to serve, what we're going to do. If we give ourselves over to just wanting the things that we want, or the things of this world, then ultimately we're serving Satan. We're doing what he wants us to do. And he'll let us go. He'll let us go far, far, far away. He wants us to. And if we follow these desires that we have to do everything that we want, then that's what we ended up, we're serving him, even if we don't think we are. We're serving him because we're doing what he wants us to do. And it also says in verse 21, it says, "What fruit had ye then in those things whereof ye are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death." That eventually you're going to look back and say, I'm ashamed of the things that I did. I'm ashamed of the decisions I made. I'm ashamed of where I brought myself, because the end of these things is death. There's no life in them. There's no good in them. And so that's like I said, that's the point that this boy had come to. Hopefully we don't get that far. Look at that, verse number 17, it says, "And when he came to himself, he said, How many have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and he will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants." So the son got to the point where he realized, I've made a big mistake. This idea that I had, I thought was going to be a great thing. It's not. It's real. I'm shipwrecked. I'm busted. I've done everything. And he realized he needed his father. And he said, I'm going to go back to the father and beg for him to take me back. He said, so these verses here, like 18 and 19, he's basically rehearsing to himself a prayer to his father and saying, Father, I want you to forgive me. I want you to let me come home. And so he's probably saying this to himself on the way back home. How I'm going to tell my father, what am I going to say to him? How am I going to beg him to please just forgive me? I'll work as one of your hired servants. I'll do anything just to please let me come back home. But before he got to the house, he didn't get a chance to say, it says that he started to say what he had rehearsed in 18, 19. He started to say that, but before he could do that, the father had already run out there and met him and put his arms around him and hugged him and said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're home. I love you. Welcome back home." And he called let's have a celebration. Our son's home. So the son didn't ever have a chance to really say, "Hey, listen, I'll do anything." The father just said, "I'm just so happy you're back. I'll take you just right now, just the way you are." And, if you get to the place where you say, "Okay, God, I know I'm not where I ought to be with you in my life, but I want to be." And if you just turn to God, he'll come to meet you. He'll come to where you are. He'll come find you. He'll come. And so that's the thing. A lot of times we're expecting, the father to scold the son about, "Oh, look what you did. You spent all my money, and you left us, and we were mad at you, and we had such a huge argument when you left, and all this stuff." And it's not that way. God doesn't care about arguing with us about what we've done wrong. He wants to forgive us and to love us and to bring us back home. He's happy for us to come back home. It's one of those things where he doesn't even think about, the things you did. He just sees his son. He's so happy that his son's coming home. So he's not at all wanting to criticize him or argue with him about what he's wasted and what he's done. He's just happy his son is home safe. His son is home with him, and that's what's important to the father. The title of this story, and they put it, a lot of times it says in my Bible, the parable of the prodigal son. But really, the title should have been the parable of the loving father, because that's really what the story's about. It matters much less what the son did. When I started the whole thing, and I wanted to talk about what happened when the son left and how bad it was, and how it was not just a easy thing, but it was a horrible thing. It was a horrible mess that when the son left. I wanted to emphasize that, to be able to say at this point that it didn't matter. Okay, you know what, yes, it was horrible, yes, it was awful, but that part didn't matter, because the Father loved the Son, and the Father wanted to receive the Son back regardless. The Father didn't care about what the Son had done. And so it's much more about the Father loving the Son in spite of everything. It's much more about that than it is about what the Son did and what he wasted. You know, it didn't matter. So as horrible as it was, it doesn't matter. And in whatever situation you're in your own life, it doesn't matter. God's willing to take you. He's willing. He wants you to come. He wants you to turn to Him. Maybe you're not saved. Maybe, and maybe you're kind of like I was. And Mommy used to tell about when she was in college, and she knew that she wasn't doing what she was supposed to do. She was like not going to class all the time. She was, you know, some of you guys maybe even know something about that. I don't know. But she had done some things that she was not proud of and knew she wasn't supposed to be doing. And well, her mom would call, or Randy would call, and Randy would call, and she would like avoided answering. She didn't want to call her back. Because she knew the first thing Randy would say was, what's going on and what's wrong? Because Randy, I'm sure, figured out something was wrong, and Mom didn't want to have to face it, want to have to answer it. But the thing about it is with God, He's not gonna ask those questions. He's gonna say, just come on. Lord, I love you. Come back. You know, if you're not saved, He's not gonna look at what you've done, where you've been. He just wants you to come home. He wants you to be a part of the family. And so, I think any of us can see and hear. Like I said, I talked about some about the kids and the different situations. But the important thing is that God loves you, and God's going to receive you and take you back, and He wants to. And so don't ever feel like, well, I just can't because of this or that, or I'm ashamed to. He's not looking at that. He just loves you and wants you to come. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this chance we've had today, and thank you for the beautiful weather, Lord. I thank you for the opportunity to have church. I thank you for your word, Lord, and I thank you most of all that you love us, Lord. You love us in spite of ourselves, in spite of no matter what we've done, no matter who we are, Lord. You know that already, Lord. There's nothing for us to have to hide, Lord, because you already know. And help us, Lord, just to turn to you and to try to come to, Lord, where you want us to be, Lord. And I know you'll come and help us and meet us and encourage us, Lord. And I pray for these ones that maybe that are struggling with one thing or another. You help them, Lord, and you go out to meet them, Lord. Give us a good day today, Lord, and a good time. We'll thank you for whatever you let us do. In Jesus' name, amen.